Who is the worst team for you, Monte? I think there's an obvious one to me, but we'll see. We'll see what people think. What do you think?
I think it's probably BDS.
I have BDS as well. Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I really want to like this team because I like Crown Shots, or I guess Crowny as he changed his ID to now. And I think that it was really bizarre that he was not actually put into the starting lineup of BDS towards the end of last season when the team was underperforming so thoroughly. But the rest of this roster, like I'm just never been high on Adam as a player. Although you never know, he might do okay within this particular meta, because in the LPL we've seen some Olaf in the top lane in the Kesante matchup. But I think on the whole, BDS, this is a pretty budget roster. Labrov is a player that you constantly hear is going to take that next step, and that, oh yeah, look at him, he's at the top of solo queue and all the pro players are singing his praises, but he's never really been able to translate that at the top level into professional play, which is true of when he was on Vitality this last couple years. And so I think it's a prove it deal for him. I think probably BDS is going to be strongest in that bot lane, but I am pretty underwhelmed, I would say, with this roster.
Yeah, the problem I have is this is one of the ones where just the roster alone means like I have to have them last place. Because I actually think the only reason they're sticking with this solo lane combo of Adam and Nuclear Int, and Nuclear Int's now called Nuke for some reason, just Nuke or whatever, like, is I assume just because of the whole like we are French fucking themed angle, which is like, that can't be enough, guys. You have to also have a good team. Because to me, like, I like the Adam one, I'm sort of like you, mate. I don't think he's ever going to be a top player, just from what I've seen. But maybe he has a bounce back split, he's slightly better. That could happen. The Nuclear Int guy, I've never understood the deal with this the whole time. As soon as he came in and replaced Abadagi and Schalke, he was just whatever, one of the worst mids in the LEC. Not a hit on him, he just never was impressive. So I don't really get why they've stuck with that angle. Like the bot lane, like you say, individually, they're good players. The Labrov one's weird to me because he was a guy, even before he came in LEC, people did say, like, this guy's going to be really fucking good. Like, you don't understand, his mechanics are top notch. And then the weird thing is this, I've noticed, even as each split and each year goes by, no players ever flame him. That's a very key aspect, because that implies to me, by the way, either in scrims or on solo queue, they do think he's good and they actually do respect his game. It's just, I agree with you. Aside from like maybe like a couple of weeks when Vitality had that hot streak in summer, I don't think he ever really looked that good in LEC. So yeah, the problem is even the name value doesn't really make it. Like, just having Crown Shot isn't enough. Like, we've seen that there've been a lot of bottom feeder teams that have had Crown Shot and just been like borderline playoffs. So that should on paper be worst team easy for me. Because the difference is the other teams at least have like some upsides. Like, this one has almost no upside to me. And on top of that, remember, there's no grabs anymore. Like, they've just got some guy I don't even know as the coach. I have no idea what's going on with the BDS project. This is why, remember, BDS replaced Schalke. This is why, be careful what you wish for. Because you know what? BDS and Misfits were some of the best orgs we ever had in the LEC for making fucking miracles out of nothing budgets. And some of these orgs, quite frankly, Heretics and BDS, look more like they're just going to permanently bottom feed to me, guys. Looks a bit disturbing.
I have at least a level of faith in Heretics because of Peter Dunn going over to that roster, and he has had an eye for talent, and he actually did, I think, snag some pretty good players. But we'll get there. I still have them in bottom, towards the bottom. I think at least in the short term, it's going to be difficult.
Let's see then. Roster. Did you have the same? Because for number 9, I had Astralis.
Interesting. I have SK.
You have SK, right? SK and Astralis were obviously the two that were interchangeable there, right? The reason I had Astralis is because I actually think if you just look at their team, like, they have basically none of the actual qualities that made them a good team last year. Like, last year they had like Vizicachi was the bad top laner, but he supposedly was like the shot calling component. And if you look at that team lived and died off like 3 things as far as I can tell. Cersei was actually a pretty good fucking jungler. The Yonghoon guy just made players with the mechanical fucking support, and then Vizicachi appeared to shot call some of the late game macros. Like, that was the best qualities they had. So all they've got is the Yonghoon guy now. So I have to say, I think it's either an 8th or a 9th team. It's not going to be very good, I don't think. This team's like, and Finn, look, here's the thing. The one upside is this. At least that Finn potentially can just like, he can just do whatever. He has the green light in this team. Just do whatever you want, mate. Like, if you're actually good, you'll prove it again in this team.
The thing about Finn that's so interesting is he's a very streaky player, and he was both the reason why XL won a lot of games last year and the reason why they lost a lot of games. And it's not that he's a coin flip going into any game. He will just have a hot hand for a while and then cool off. And so I think that the floor of this team is still relatively high with Finn. By the way, I think there's a pretty big difference between 10th and 9th place here, if I had to say. I had SK there. But why I had Astralis a little higher is that Junghoon is a big-time playmaker. And I think he was one of the really big revelations of last year. And I think that this team is going to have at least a pretty high level of agency with him. And I think Dayor and Finn in their solo lanes and Kabe those are all solid players with a reasonably high floor. And then I don't know about this 113 guy, this Turkish player that they have, but if he can click with Junghoon, I think Astralis can be kind of okay. I think it's going to be a kind of okay team.
The brief times I watched the Carmine Corp team that guy played for in the LFL, like he seemed like he was a fucking meme, mate, that 113 guy. So I don't know about that one. So that's why I have him
only 18 years old. He's 18 years old. So maybe he can be formed, by the coaching staff or the other veteran players on this roster into something. Sure. But that's why I think Astralis will do better as the year goes on. I think this is one of those teams that I think Junghoon is still a relatively new player. They are going to be relying on a really young jungler. And I think it's going to take some time for this team to gel. So I anticipate that this roster would probably, if they don't make changes, obviously between spring and summer, would do better the longer they play together rather than doing super well right away as they try and reinvent their identity. So I had them at 7th. Or 8th rather. I had SK at 9th. And SK, this team is so strange because I know that SK was actually trying to go make moves during the offseason, but that a lot of players didn't want to join this roster. And it ended up that what they got were some okay players that didn't really have a lot of other options. When you have Marcoon here, who I think, generally played quite well this last year, but you're not going to take Marcoon over Xerxes if you have that opportunity, if you're Excel. And then you have Irrelevant, who showed up and was quite, he overperformed. I would say this. He overperformed relative to expectations coming into the league as a completely unknown player, had some, nice Sejuani games and filled a gap on Misfits. But he at the end of the day was always going to be playing second fiddle to VTO. So is this guy going to be capable of carrying more games himself? Because what's unfortunate about SK is that this team appears to lack a strong carry. So I don't know who's going to pick up the slack here, and I think it's going to take some time to suss that out.
Yeah, the problem I have with this lineup is I actually think some parts of it are pretty good. And actually, I have them at 8th instead of 9th like you, but also I don't have them as one of the top teams. The problem is this, I'll just go down. The Irrelevant guy, I also agree, I actually thought was pretty good in Misfits, but he definitely looked like a complete weak side top laner. Yes. Luckily, that is the prevailing, predominant fucking meta in League of Legends historically, so it's pretty good to have those players. Marcoon is basically an example of a really good signing by SK. As you say, he wasn't kicked out of Excel for being bad. They just were able to get an even better player with even more experience. You know what I mean? There was just, they could upgrade basically. So it was a rare example of where, because so many other teams have their jungler set, somehow SK gets to have Marcoon, who if I had to do a ranking of junglers in LEC, he's probably going to be even just off the top of my head, probably 5th, 4th or something. He's going to be in a pretty good spot. So I think that's a really good move. As an aside, for people who are interested, I heard there's a world where if negotiations had gone differently, maybe they could have had Jankos and SK. So that just actually shows how crazy this fucking offseason was. He could have been in really good teams. He could have been in bad teams. He ended up in Heretics somehow, who I imagine are going to come in a couple of names and be sort of not that relevant. So I think that's a big signing, is the Marcoon one. Certus, I actually thought in mid lane was a player who, as the year went on, looked a bit better. He had more games that were relevant and could carry stuff. Still not some top mid laner to me. I still think, for example, if people don't know, for the Prime team, the ERL team, they signed Febiven. If I'm them, if Febiven actually shows any form, I just bring him in. Why not?
That's true.
The rest, you can do that, remember, is an option. So that's not a bad angle. And you can also keep the Certus guy if you want. The bot lane, I'm not that sure about. The DOS guy's been a bit of a meme, even though people have said each time he's come into LEC, he's supposed to be good. I just don't know the Exekit guy that much. I saw him a little bit in the LFL. That seems like not a bad gamble. But the problem is, essentially, what I have to say about SK is the same, disclaimer or preamble I'll say every time about SK, which is I used to work for SK, and the guy who at the absolute top of SK who still makes all the decisions is Alexander Mueller, the Slash from SK Gaming. And basically, he's just not someone to this day who buys into the idea of esports. If you saw that episode we just did of the Four Horsemen with Tommy / Lurpis, which was about business, well, we explained in the beginning how in the modern day, the venture capital model of esports is the notion that it's like a startup and you're trying to scale it to like a national level. Think of Shark Tank, basically, if you know that concept. You're trying to take a good idea, put all the money in today, make all the money tomorrow, and sell it the day after that, and then on to the next business, like all those entrepreneurs do. That's what the current model of esports is, right? So everyone else is trying to take in millions and millions in VC, and then it's like Vitality and all and sign a massive squad and make a super team. SK is on the old approach of esports. The reason why SK has been here as an org for 25 years, guys, is because they run it like a business, and they're all about having like stable partners, typically, by the way, specifically like famous companies in Germany, because there's like cultural reasons they'd want to, and they're about like managing the budget. So the difference is, when I said they could have had Yankos, that would have been for like what would be quite a very reasonable deal. So when that wasn't available, they didn't end up getting him. They had to go with Marcoon instead. So the point is, SK is probably always going to be in this position they are now. In my opinion, they'll always be a team that's like bottom end. They'll be like a playoff team potentially, which for them's good, but they're not good. They're going to try and min-max it. They're trying to get there from like a reasonable budget. They're never going to overspend. Because if you don't know, just as a very quick aside, you might think that's all boring. We all know SK aren't good. How about this then, motherfuckers? I heard BDS spent loads of money on that shit team last year. How you like them apples? So they mega overpaid to come last place and be absolutely dreadful and lose 1 billion games. They even put, by the way, one of the best coaches ever in European history. He fixed like half the drafts. He got them like impossible fucking 7D Jenga drafts where they would be ahead for the first 10 minutes. One of the worst rosters ever. And then they would still throw it. Like they would literally just take everything he built and just toss it in the fucking trash. Like that's the world we live in, guys. Yeah. If you don't know, there are orgs that are absolutely just throwing money against the wall. So like the point is, understand SK will always be this like grinder org, basically. They'll always be at this spot trying to fucking turn like this, trying to turn one good player into one slightly better player. That's it. Yeah. That's their gig.
The problem with Spring, though, is like without I've heard good things about Exakick, by the way, but without like, are they just going to play through bot lane? Is that going to be the plan here? Is Surtus going to take the next step forward? But I don't think this team has a clear identity. And when you don't have that clear identity, I think it's just going to take some time for them to figure it out. And that's why I think for me, they're ninth place. And Astralis, at least, I can see angles or floors for certain players that are reliable, which is why I have them one higher.
But here's the thing. My number 7 is Heretics. Is it the same for you?
Yep.
Right. The thing with this one is this. This is one of the weirdest fucking rosters I have ever seen constructed.
I'm so curious what they're going to do.
Because it's so all over the place. Like there really isn't, except for Peter Dunn approved it. I don't know what the connecting factor is. So on the one hand, right, you have got Evie. Yes, the Japanese. I know a lot of people mistake this. They mistake because of Arya. They think Evie was Korean as well. No, he's Japanese. They've got a Japanese import top laner. Literally that guy who was on Detonation Focus Me, who all those years ago was beating like fucking Cloud9 with perks and all those weird ass results that we've seen. The guy who, if you remember, Nymera said like had all those weird matchups where he would just go super all in at like level 2 or something mental and push off the wave. Yeah, that guy's coming to play a top lane in Europe, which is like, what?
I'm all about this. I'm actually incredibly hyped for this.
Put it this way, it's definitely a good novelty angle. It's a good gimmick, isn't it? Yeah.
It's not only a good gimmick, but like this guy has been actually good. So here's what I like about this move, as crazy as it sounds. He has been, he has a very distinct style, which you can, as you say, you can calculate around, and you can design game plans around, which is interesting, right? He is a good top laner. He's an unconventional top laner, but I don't think that's going to slow down Peter Dunn. But my real question for him is, what happens when he's in a region where he's going to have better competition than he did in the LJL in Japan? And he's going to probably have a more robust coaching and infrastructure staff surrounding him, or at least a different one that is going to challenge him in new ways and try and develop him as a player. I am deeply curious what Peter Dunn is going to do with this guy. And I think it's so fun to see this. And it's so hilarious to see how they built out the rest of this roster, particularly with Jankos, which like Jankos, I assure you, I did not have Yankos Ganks Evie's Lane on my LEC bingo
on your mad
card
ribs
for this year. It's like so stupid. It begs belief, like beggars belief, right? And then they have Ruby that they pulled, is a Korean player that has been in the lower levels of Europe that they are now promoting.
This move here, by the way, is where you're supposed to like attune your expectations based on the fact it's Peter Dunne. If this was like a coach you've never heard of, we'd all be going like, this master's going to be fucking whack. But because it's Peter Dunne, you're supposed to believe he's had the Midas touch and he's just reached into the RLs and just pulled a gem out and that this guy's going to be sick. Because everyone's hyping this guy now, I know it's for that reason. Like, oh, he's got a fucking sick read or something.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have no idea. I'm just curious where they go with the rest of this roster. I can't, in good faith, have them higher than 7th, and the reason why I have them at the spot it is because I believe in Peter Dunne's ability to select and coach these players, right? They also have CL now, which is another interesting pickup. So for those of you who don't know, he was on Rogue previously and is a coach that I think partnering up with Peter Dunne is going to be very interesting because he's very smart about the game. And I think was a lot of the reason, especially behind some of Rogue's more creative strategic decisions. So I like the coaching staff a lot for Heretics, and I think they'll understand how to use these players, which is why I have them a little higher up. I also think they'll get better over time.
The only thing is, though, aside from the gimmick, like, look, Yankos is really good. The Evie guy, I could believe will be all right. Maybe the Ruby guy's not bad. I don't know about the bot lane, though. The problem is, for me, like, here's the difference. The difference between 7 and everyone I have above 7, there's a line there, Monte. From whoever I have above Rex, there's a line there.
I think Heretics is going to start a little rough. I think they'll get better the longer the year goes.
Like, I also think there's a world where they could just fuck up and be like 9th as well. We'll see. We'll see on this one. I'll give Peter Dunne some time, but we'll see.
Exactly. So I think by the end of spring, they'll be looking pretty good.
Oh, by the way, as an aside, I do think, though, if anyone remembers, wasn't it Jack Spectre who did that meme where you remember where they signed Reckless instead of him, and he did that meme where he just cosplayed as Reckless and did that like Sharpie Reckless down his arm of the tattoo. Try put in Jack Spectre Reckless and images on Google and you'll see what I mean. It was fucking hilarious because he like messages back like the K-Corp owner, like, hey, like we need to have a renegotiation. It was just him dressed as like Reckless. It was actually a banger. If you know what I'm on about, I'm pretty sure it was him who did it. Just go and look that up. If it was, that's definitely that's a moment in history that needs to be remembered. It was fire. Right, should we go to the next one then? Because here's the thing. Yeah. I'm guessing the next one. Well, I'll be interested. Is the next one Mad Lions, Monte?
Yes.
That's Mad Lions for me as well. Number 6 is Mad Lions for me. So I'll start this one off then. Right. The key thing for Mad Lions here is somehow, look, the org obviously wanted to sell El Yoyo, so they fumbled that. But the joke is for the team Mad Lions is way better than they fumbled it because, spoiler, they weren't, unless they were themselves going to get Yankos, which doesn't appear they were, unless they did a deal there. Like, I don't see how they could get a better jungler than El Yoyo right now. So that's a banger to keep El Yoyo. That at least makes it interesting for the fucking split because, like, realistically, the joke is, these guys are, by the way, does no org in LEC have any self-respect? Like, Reckless has left Fnatic of his own volition 2 times. Like, and they still just welcome this guy back. Because similarly, like, Kazi just left you high and dry. He was just like, right, cheers for the titles. Suck my dick. I'm going to Vitality. And then all of a sudden, when it doesn't work out at Vitality, like, well, welcome back, Kazi. Like, because here's the thing. It probably is the right move in theory because they lost the Unforgiven guy. But I think losing the Unforgiven guy is unforgivable, funnily enough. Like, that was ridiculous. Like, that guy, by the way,
double lifts back up on 100 Thieves.
That guy, if you notice, split on split, that guy looked like this is the year he would have exploded. Like, this is the year you wanted to keep him. And then look, Hillisang, like, I think it's like a fucking side grade. Bear in mind, he was so questionable for Kai's. I think Kai's a pretty good player. Like, I don't mind this roster. It's not bad, but I do have him as 6th. Like, I think they're firmly 5th or 6th to me. Like, I don't think they're going to be better.
I mean, yes, Hillisang is an unpredictably streaky player, but his performance at Worlds and like towards the end of the season was really quite terrible.
See like some real play before I can forgive him, basically. He's done too much now, man.
And by the way, what the fuck is this bot lane? What the fuck is this bot lane? Carzzy and Hillisang together. So what? Hylissang's going to go in with a pike hook, and Carzzy's going to arcane shift out of that fight. Like this synergy does not make any sense to me whatsoever. Like I think this lane is a fucking disaster. And then not only that, but you have this Mad Lions roster who drastically underperformed at Worlds, hilariously even made it to Worlds in the first place and didn't deserve to be there. And then also somehow got 4 of their 5 players on the first team All-Pro. Now, Alyoya is a very good player. And in terms of his strengths, we know that he solves a lot of issues by being a very vocal early game jungler. That's why Mad Lions wanted him in the first place. We have been told that by Mad Lions coaches on this show. And so they wanted to get somebody who was very active in the early game. He was a banger right out of the gate, very confident. And it's no wonder that a lot of teams wanted him. Like, I'm sad that he's not on G2 this season. But the question is, when you know that you could have been on a much better roster if you're Alyoya, are you really going to try your hardest? At the end of the day, you can say, oh, I want to do well, but is your motivation going to be 100% there to play on this Mad Lions roster that is probably just going to try and sell you at the next opportunity? I think that's hard to believe. And Mad Lions,
and let's be real, I doubt that he's getting mega paid at Mad Lions if you think of what contract he must have been on before. So he's also probably not on that much money. And remember, this guy was a champion. Like, if I'm him, I'm like, dude, I'm supposed to get paid. Like, third year in, this is where you get paid.
Yeah, I think if I'm him right now, let's check on his contract.
And he's a guy, if you don't know, behind the scenes, this is the guy all the fucking players want to play with. Like, I bet he had his pick away, wanted to go pretty much.
He's going to be a free agent at the end of this season. He can have a bad year and still get mega paid at the end of this because his underperformance is going to be completely justifiable. And I don't think that I think he can easily return to form if he takes it easy. Now, I have Mad Lions higher than some other teams just because they do have some fundamentally strong veteran players. And also, even though I'm not super familiar with the chasey Korean top laner that they have who, was a substitute on Damwon Kia in 2021 and has been banging around the lower level European leagues, I do believe that Mad Lions is exceptionally good at coaching and figuring out players that fit into their roster. If there's something you can say about Mad Lions, is their GMing is very good, their scouting is very good, their coaching is very good, and they are able to consistently get more than the sum of their results that are more than the sum of their parts. So I think this is a very difficult puzzle to solve, especially that bot lane. But if any coaching staff is going to be able to make this work, it's probably Mad Lions. And I think that at least in spring, they may struggle a little bit, especially because I would be quite salty if I was Alyoya right now. And I think understandably so, given the offseason.
Yeah, I will say the one upside, I agree when you say it like that, even though I don't think the roster will actually end up being that good and the synergies will be there and all that jazz. As much as like Hylissang's the obvious example of this, like it could go badly, but there's also a world where you might just absolutely trip over and lock into him having a good fucking split. And then suddenly the team looks way better. And then, like you say, the coaching staff's going to get all the credit, or the GM is going to get all the credit because they've gambled on these players. Like people are up on Hylissang and Carzzy and even keeping Niski after the way the split went. Like, even though he was the MVP, guys, notice how differently the fucking feel is now. Like, if he's the MVP, then logically we should be loving it. We got the best jungler, we got the MVP of the whole league. Niski, we've got the best pieces, right? And nobody's hyped about this team winning LEC, so they definitely have to prove something to me. I don't know the chasey guy, obviously, so I'll have to just wait and see on that one. Right, for my number 5, this is where already it could potentially get spicy. Because are you ready? In keeping with my true tradition of always underrating Fnatic, I've got Fnatic number 5. That's right.
I have Fnatic number 5 as well.
Oh, okay. Because obviously all they did in Fnatic was swap out the bot lane, right? Upset, obviously, he's just technically sat there doing nothing. Reckless is back because this is some fucked up dog shit, same script as they've done all the other times. Like, he's back. Like, why? I don't know why Fnatic's locked in some fucking codependent death spiral with Reckless, where they must destroy each other over and over again and then keep cycling back like, I just can't quit you, man. Like, who knows why that's the thing? I don't know. And then obviously they've got this weird thing where the Rocks guy who played instead of Hylissang initially at Worlds, if you remember, just is the support now. And obviously people were, to be fair, giving him props in this sort of play. So the weirdest thing about this for me, I've got to start here, is this. Dude, I cannot believe if you'd stopped any week of Best Damn League Show last year after Fnatic went to shit in the spring and said to us next year they keep both Razork and Humanoid together.
So crazy.
Like I would never believe it. In fact, I even heard, I don't know if people know this, because Humanoid like went to shit as well, and they obviously had no synergy with the jungler. I even heard there was some shit, like there was times when Wonder had champions he wanted to play top lane that were like mid to top flexes, like he used to in G2, and they couldn't even do it because Humanoid couldn't play the champion or they could never lock it in for him. Like I thought the joke last year was that was the number one dis-synergy you had was fucking Razork and Humanoid. Look like they didn't even know each other. They were like passing ships in the night when they went on the map or something. Like, I can't believe, like, here's the problem. On paper, this is still a good team. It's still got some really good players. On paper, I'm supposed to probably, if the Lux guy ends up being good, believe this could be a contender. But mate, I just cannot in good conscience believe this lineup right now is good. Can it be? Really?
So the thing is that obviously one of the main rumors was that Elyoya would go to Fnatic and Razork would go to Mad Lions, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it during the off season. And before, obviously, as to the Reckless thing, it's speaking of the toxic relationship, it's almost as if Sam Matthews just like texts Reckless, "You up?" and then like gets him back on the team. they just
he's
can't
like
quit
drunk
each other,
texted
man.
him. He's like, yeah,
Exactly. You up, Reckless? I saw your Insta post. You look hot with those tattoos.
There's another thing. Didn't I call that, guys? I called that ages ago. Like, I mean, I'll say my joke because my joke's not bad. But here, put it this way. If you haven't seen, over time, because it seems to be like every 3 months you get an update, Reckless is just turning more of himself into a giant custom skin of Varus. And the reason why this is mental to me, but here's my joke, is that's the only way Reckless is ever going to get his world skin. He has to create it. Basically, the joke here, Monte, is this is a David Cronenberg esports movie in which the pro player who was almost legendary of all time and came that close to Worlds a few times, eventually the only way he can complete the sort of psychodramatic theatre he was unfolding in his mind is to actually create the world skin on his own body as the canvas.
I love it, man. You know, make the world you want to live in.
There you go. Because I can't believe he's back again. I know it's so, especially because I think this is an example of where I get like cognitive dissonance that fans aren't more outraged. Look, I know Fnatic fans, for whatever reason, didn't really fuck with Upset and had their own problems with the drama of like the Worlds event like 2 years ago or whatever. But bro, he was easily the best player in Fnatic like the whole last year. Like he was the whole reason they got to Worlds, where they even were winning games. Like, guys, like, how is he not in the league? That is so egregious, it's mental. Like, the best ADC basically isn't in LEC or LCS even, like. And then secondly, the idea that, like, if you're a fan of Fnatic, look, you might be a fan of Reckless, but, like, aren't you just sort of like, why have we kicked the best player out of our team? Like, what are we doing? And then as an aside, don't forget, they don't have Yamato Cannon anymore. And I don't think that's a minor issue, Monty. I know people are going to think because he comes on our show that we're, like, biased. No, from talking to him and seeing, like, his actual ideas implemented in the game, I do think he was a massive reason why they actually got that shit together. Yes. Look, I will say, if you go to the beginning of last year, obviously you can't give him a top fucking grade because he had on paper like a god roster and he didn't win anything, right? But if you know the problems they had and how bad they got in summer, I think it was him and the fucking coaching staff that lifted that team out of the mire and figured out things like you have to just play through Upset. Like, let's just make these drafts. You saw those stories. He was the coach who actually was trying to figure stuff out. You give this team the Yumi, you don't give it. Like, he did a fucking great job, I thought, man. So I don't know this coaching staff they've got now, to be fair. I have no idea how this one's going to go in that sense.
I agree. I think Yamato does deserve a lot of credit, and I think he was dealing with problems that are unsolvable.
Yes.
After watching, as you say, Thorin, Razork and Humanoid play together for a year, I think that is not a solvable issue, which is why it's so kind of outrageous that they kept both of them together, because people will remember the highs. So, for example, in LEC summer playoffs, Razork was extremely good. He was extremely good. And he carried a lot of those games at the end of the summer season. At Worlds, Humanoid was extremely good. But they were good in spite of each other, not because they had some synergy. And indeed, you saw the synergy fall apart again at Worlds when Razork wasn't having like crazy poppy performances, right? And Humanoid, again, was honestly, he was one of the best mid laners in the entirety of Worlds. When he is at his peak, he is excellent. I think he probably has some pretty severe motivation issues because for big tournaments, he will show up, but a lot of the season, he was frankly bad in a lot of the regular
who told
season
me this,
games.
Monte, but someone, I think it might even have been a coach or a teammate of his or something. Someone told me something that like he's the sort of player where this might sound weird, but like if sort of he knows he should be better than someone else, he won't like give it 100% if it's like a meaningless game, if you know what I mean. Like he's the guy where it's like, I'm supposed to be better than you, but like he just does like the fucking B- effort, if you know what I mean. Which to be fair, when they told me that did like fit entirely with what I see of his personality, because it's alien to me. Like he can be fucking amazing, clearly.
What I've heard is that he just doesn't like League of Legends.
Oh, could be one of those ones, right? That's also something, by the way, that people might not get. That happens occasionally in CSGO as well. What you get is every now and then you get a player who, like, maybe they loved the game 4 years ago, and the problem they have now is they're just insanely good at the game. And the problem is they think, like, it's my career. It's, essentially now it's like my vocation or my profession, not my passion. That happens every now and then. That's a brutal one, because I have to say, if that happens as well, that sort of player isn't the one who's going to just grind 1 billion hours to get out of trouble, is he?
Yep.
You know?
Yep. So I've heard that he does increase his practice, you know, when the pressure is on, and it's a high. I mean, you see that reflected in his performance from this last year. He was pretty bad at some points.
I'll say as well, by the way, shout out to whichever fan did figure out the naughty fucking nickname, where obviously because his name's Humanoid, they would call him Subhumanoid when he would do those games where he just fed it like level 3 in the most obvious way. Like, fair play when he came up with that. That was pretty good.
I felt bad for Razor because, you know, he'd just be standing there watching his mid laner just completely grief mid lane.
I always said as well, by the way, that's why I thought, look, I am friends with him, but I also just felt so bad for Upset, because at the time when he was like the best player on their team, and if you gave him, like, if he got a Zeri, he's going to carry the whole game. Like, the joke is he's the ADC, so he's just locked in lane, like, right, when do I get to play the game? And as he's waiting for, like, he might even be up like in CS, he would just see his jungler just fucking die, and then his mid laner just int for no reason at level 3, like, and he's like, that's like where you just FF in fucking solo queue, guys. Like, he has to play that pro game, like, he hasn't got a chance. I guess he doesn't have to worry about it now, though, so took care of that. Yeah.
And as exciting as it is to talk about Rux, because he did have a very good debut at Worlds, and
you do realize that obviously what happened here is obviously Upset's had a cursed monkey paw scenario, hasn't he? Because he's obviously gone. Are you ready, Monte? He's obviously gone. You know what? I wish I'd never have to deal with the bloody problems that Hylissang, Razork, and Humanoid have caused me ever again. No, wait, no, I forgot the terms and conditions. Like, and banished to the fucking Shadow Realm. Banished to the Shadow Realm. Like, he's done himself, honey. He's done himself on that one.
He's put in the Phantom Zone.
Yes. Do you think this Rux guy's going to be good then?
Look, he was good for a few games at Worlds.
Yeah,
that's what we know. He overperformed in a high pressure situation. It's a very good sign as a rookie to come in when your team's not there because of COVID, and you are replacing one of the most legendary supports in the history of your region, and to have that kind of solid performance. Arguably, in the games that he played, he had an overall better performance than Hylissang at Worlds, even though he played a lot fewer games, right? And it was play-ins, etc. But I think that this guy showed a lot of promise. Whether he can live up to that is a different story. I think it's tough to be in a lane with a super veteran like Reckless and try and define your own style, because that you are going to be intimidated by that, and you are going to feel like you have to kind of bend your style to his most of the time. And then also there's the question of what his synergy with Razork will look like in the long term. So there's a lot of questions about this Fnatic roster, and I think that there are just fundamental flaws between Razork and Humanoid that are going to keep them from greatness. Now, there is an outside shot that the new coaches will be able to fix that problem, or Razork and Humanoid will get over it and figure it out themselves. If that happens, this team could be pretty good, but I just don't think it will. There's no reason after a year of watching this, when it wasn't fixed, to think that magically it's going to be fixed now.
I think if you want them to be good, you have to pin your hopes that, because the coach appears to be the coach, he's also from Portugal, of Rux when he was in there, like, academy team or whatever the fuck that team that he was playing on was. Like, maybe he knows this guy and can integrate him into the lineup or some jazz. Because the problem is, I think it's like a good roster of players. I don't think they did a bad job in the off season or whatever. I'm just a little bit uninspired. Like, put it this way, when you say that detail, Monte, that like this could be El Yoya instead of Razork, now that would be fucking exciting. Like, I might have this team number 1 if that was the case. Like, but the problem is it isn't. The deal didn't get done. So like, I think to me it's going to be another season of Razork and Humanoid collectively together aren't as good as you'd think they would be. So that's why I've got them number 5.
Too.
Could have
It's
been
weird.
Jankos as well. It would be a banger too.
I find it very weird. I really wonder what happened with Fnatic, where they didn't make a change. And unfortunately, because Humanoid ceiling is so high, you just kind of have to keep Humanoid, I think, when there are other not to say Razork is bad, he would have found another home, but there are other equivalent junglers you could have taken. But Humanoid's really hard to replace because you look at his peak games and you literally are forced to conclude that this guy is one of the best mid laners in the world.
Here's the thing, Monty. The only problem is that it could have been, as you say, El Yoya or Jankos here. So I'm not going to give this team any like bad grade. I'm not going to give them yikes. I'm like G2. I'm going to give them one yike. So whatever. I had to do that just to get it in now because it's going to be done at some point as a shit joke in it. So we got that one out of the way. Yeah, I think that one's that. So here's the question though, Monty. Who is your fourth team?
G2.
I had G2 as well. Okay, we're in a groove now. We're on the same path. Right, I have to say, dude, this has to start with what I've just talked about, the Yike angle. Because here's the issue, Monty. Even if the Yike guy is some like genius pick, maybe he's the correct pick out of VRLs, maybe he's going to be the next El Yoya. Remember, El Yoya came in, he was just winning LEC splits out of the gate, looking awesome. You know, the problem is this: you gave up Jankos. Really? Because my problem is this, like, look, he definitely has had bad games, especially last year at times, but like, he never dropped off for me. And his ceiling definitely is still fucking really great. His floor's still great. Like, I cannot believe, because to me, the same roster, if you just keep Jankos, would be a really interesting team. I would have them again. Like, they'd be a lock for top 3 in my opinion, in Worlds and all the rest of this. Just, so I think this is such a huge gamble to me. I'm really unsure about it, mate.
But here's the thing. When Caps re-signed his deal, so Caps signed a new deal with G2 in the offseason. Part of that deal, as I understand it, was that Caps is being given significant control over.
Yeah, I heard he picked the players, basically. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
he basically is. If he's not technically the GM, but he has a very heavy hand in which players are going to be selected to this roster. And he wanted Mickey X back, and he wanted Yike, and he wanted Hansama. So
wait a minute, So here's what happened then, Monty. We have to do this in true Summoning Insight fashion. What obviously has happened is this. Now you know why G2 was so up and down the last 2 years. Because the last 2 years, remember, Monty, they didn't have perks, but they still had Caps, but Caps was just a player. What's obviously happened is now that Ocelot's had to step down and there's no perks, they've finally imbued Caps with like the true power of poaching. Like he's imbued with all of the G2 energy to poach. Like, and that's why he is the one just choosing people's fates and people live and die and everything. He's doing it all, mate. He's doing it all.
He's manipulating other teams too with his magic powers. He waived Hansama's buyout on Team Liquid, got him to be a free agent so they could just easily pick him up. He must see something in this Yike guy. Now, it's very clear he did not want to play with Jankos anymore, which is why Jankos isn't on this team. As a GM, if you watched last year, I don't think you would make that decision, especially if you're going to be replacing it with a rookie. Now, why this team isn't higher for me is you look at Hansama on paper, and if you somehow missed, if you're a European fan and you missed all of LCS last year, you might say, wow, I remember his Worlds performances on Rogue in 2021. He was fucking amazing. Well, he has been terrible this last year on Team Liquid, like really bad. And part of that was probably because he never got into that synergy with Core JJ. I heard on Team Liquid that there was a pretty big disagreement in how they wanted to play the game. Core JJ wanted to be much more aggressive. Other members of Team, like it was like Core JJ and Bwipo wanted to play a certain way, and like Bjergsen and Hansama wanted to play a certain way. And it ended up just being a dysfunctional mess, as we know. But even on an individual level, Hansama looked quite bad. That could be motivation. That could be a motivation issue. He may have fallen off a cliff forever. We're not going to know the answer to that question until we start watching this year. I tend to think he can at least get back into form, but they are going to struggle at least in spring. This is a team that could do very well come summer, but right away, I think it's a lot to ask for Yike to be a top-level player, for Hansama to get back into form. And Caps is obviously extremely variable in terms of his own form. We did see some peak Caps games last year, like really excellent Caps play. But at the same time, especially in like spring playoffs. But at the same time, I think this team is going to struggle. They have Dylan Falco, who's a very good coach, though. I think they will figure it out in the long term, but I think in spring, probably fourth is pretty fair for them.
Yeah, the reason I have G2 down at fourth for me is I actually, similar to you, I don't have them as like a team that's going to contend or be a championship. Every other team after this are my contenders. I'd have another demarcation here. This is like the best of the rest, as it were. Because I look at the team, like on paper, Broken Blade's still a pretty good player, above average at his position. Yep. Even when he's the best, I don't think he's like the dominant player people make up, but whatever. He's still good for LEC. Caps obviously could be the best player, could still be the MVP. That's a great angle to keep that player. The thing is, aside from that, I think you've got question marks all over the place. Like, as much as I think Mickey X has proven he's a very good player, who the fuck knows how he's going to play with Hans Sama? If people don't remember, these two played together in Misfits when he, like, the year after they had that run with Ignar and where they were going against Faker and SKT. If you remember, Ignar left and then they brought in fucking Mickey X to be the support. And at the time, people were hyping it like, oh my God, Mickey X and Hans Sama. It was just all right. It just wasn't even that great. So to me, I don't really know why that one, because I've heard on that one, that was like Hans Sama's pick. Like, I want to have Mickey X. Like, I don't know why this is. I don't really get, by the way, some of the players in League of Legends. Like, I don't understand a world where like Impact is always just like kicked out of teams, but then people are like literally like killing each other in fucking like Dark Knight style, like base, like with fucking pool sticks. Like, please, can I be the one to pay who needs $7 million? Like, I don't get. Same thing with LEC. Like, LEC is where every year people go upset. Can take him or leave him if I'm being honest. But then the second they take a breath. Hans Sama, I will crawl across broken glass and smash my own testicles with a soldering iron to have a chance to ask him to join my team. Like, I don't get it, mate. Like, they're both really good players. So to me, like, I think this is a really weird gamble. I know it's part of it's because I've heard they have in the team wanted Hans Sama in the past and maybe Caps wants to play with him or whatever jazz. But I just feel like this is a bit of a reach. Like, I don't know why G2's the one gambling here. Like, why is G2 not the one signing Neon? Or why is G2 not the one getting upset in the scenario? Or that, I know why they wouldn't get reckless, to be fair, on that one. But then again, why is Fnatic getting him if that's the logic, right? It doesn't make any fucking sense there, boys. So I think actually, I think this might be an underwhelming team, mate. Like, I think this one basically will, like I said, I have them fourth for good reason. I think fourth or fifth is where this team's going to be.
They also sold Targamas, which to me is one of the craziest moves you can make, because he has proven over this last year to be just a ridiculously
You were doing
player.
the stock graph or the fucking crypto graph. If you have the little zoomers, that's a stock that's going like that, guys. Like, that's the one where this is the year something like that becomes like an MVP if they're going to be like a core JJ or something. Like, this is the year. I agree with you.
He commanded a premium too. From what I've heard from people, is that his buyout was not small for XL, so he was a hot commodity on the market. And I guess Hans and Caps wanted Mickey X on this roster. That was a player driven choice, as I understand it. We'll have to see about Yike. I do understand that some people are very excited about this guy as a jungler, but he's still going to be a rookie, and that translation into the LEC stage is going to be a barrier. But G2, with the coaching staff they have with Dylan Falco, I think this team can be good. They can obviously contend for LEC titles if Yike and Mickey X's performance are good, and Caps can always just hard carry games. When he's on, he's one of the best players in the whole world. So
I'll say this though, and this is where people get upset. Here's the fucking spice.
Well,
all I'm going to say is this, guys. Think about, yeah, it's true. Think about how many years Caps has played and what an excellent player he's been, right? Two of the best splits of Caps's entire career would be like, I mean, he even was like MVP candidate, etc. Two of the best splits of his entire career was with Jankos was his jungler. It was last year. He was doing this. They were doing that streak. Jankos was jungler. Then you go back to before when it was 2020 and he was just smurfing in summer, fucking shitting on everyone, right? I'm not saying Caps won't be as good, but like, I think people underestimate. Like, if you go watch that Reflections I did with Perks, I asked Perks on it basically, because once I did a show that I don't know if it was Crackdown or Listen Local, one of those other shows. And when I had Perks on, I like hyped up Jankos, and I was like, I think people underrate Jankos. You know, he's like all the years he's been in, he's super stable, he'll always be good. And at the end of doing this rant, right, Perks actually says the line. He says, yeah, he might be the best player I've ever played with. And he said this while he was in the team with Caps. So in my Reflections, I asked him, like, what did you mean by that? And essentially what he gets to is just why I'm bringing it up. Is like Jankos is like the ultimate like fucking crazy floor player. Like, he'll never play bad. Like, he'll always find a way to be like relevant. Like, he's the guy where you don't have to tell him to do something. He knows to like take control of this aspect. Like, basically the thing that all the coaching staff praised the two players when they were playing together, Jankos and Caps, which is like, oh, Jankos always seems to know like shadow like where Caps is going to be and when to come in. Like, they're not common, that guy's like Jankos just does that in his brain with mad experience at the game. So the problem is basically, even if Yike for real is El Yoya 2.0 and he's going to be like mechanically one of the best, you're not going to make up that gap of experience, guys. Like there's certain positions in games, and in my opinion, here's my analogy. I think being a jungler in League of Legends is like being a fucking veteran defensive player in the NFL, Monte. Because even though in theory you want the young stud, you want the guy who's the faster guy, the stronger, mate, if you still have, like, you haven't hit the threshold where your physical skills are completely gone, you just know the game so well at that point, mate. When you're like 10 years in and you've watched all those players, like, your mind for where the players, like, that's what Jankos had. So to me, I find it crazy, because unless they were getting El Yoyo, which could have been a move here, obviously, like, I can't believe you give up Jankos. I would have kept him for one more year, mate. In my opinion, one more. You do a last dance with Jankos if you know.
Cap said no. That's it. Like, for whatever reason, I think it's a very obviously we all thought it was a strange decision as it was happening, and it remains a strange decision. And I am curious about what he's going to do on Heretics. Maybe he'll just do like a one and done year with them before moving on to a different roster. But I will say, at least he buffs up the mid-table of LEC and makes some of these matches more exciting. I'm looking forward to.
We have to say this. Here's one thing we have to say.
Here's
one thing though, Monte. We made it sound like, oh, it's a good move. Yeah, it's a good move for Heretics. I don't think that's a good move for Jankos. Like, that's the other thing, dude. Like, imagine that. Imagine seeing how over the year all the problems Razork had. I can't even get in your team, and I'm Jankos. Like, you know what I mean? Like, mate, same with XL. Oh, that's the thing. I did hear there was a world where XL tried to maybe get him, and that was how they were going to complete their super team, but for whatever reason, the negotiation didn't. I just feel like it's a bit whack. You end up on Heretics. It's like, well, how are you not on a contender, bro? You know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe El Yoyo's team. I can't join Mad Lions. That's the only one, surely. I should have had my pick of these teams. I think that's another example of what they always do as well in LEC. Dude, they always get the vets and throw them away way too early. They always get the Swazes of the world. They're like, actually, we're done with you. It's like, they haven't got one more split in them, you fucking cynical bastard. Like, come on. These are the greatest players of all time we're talking about. Remember, Jankos just like trips over and goes to semis and worlds. Like, what's this shit? It's wild, isn't it?
It
no
is.
respect for junglers. No respect for junglers.
No respect for the veterans of the scene.
But no,
or their elders.
Exactly.
Let's go. We got top 3 now. I'm curious what your order on these top.
Here we go then, because this is where it's going to already get spicy. Because as number 3, I have Vitality.
I have Koi.
Right, that's the difference. I have their number 2. So we've got the same number 1. We've got XL number 1, right? The reason I have Vitality number 3.
Vitality number 1. Let's go.
Oh, sorry, I didn't think the order through that.
I have Vitality number 1. Anyway, go.
The reason I have Vitality number 3 is there's 2 main factors here, and they are the top laner and the jungler. So first things first, how the fuck am I supposed to know how Photon, the Korean top laner, is going to play in the LEC? I can't know that. And spoiler, Vitality in theory doesn't, because they were originally going to have Alfari, weren't they? So obviously that drama happened where Alfari decided to take the split off or whatever the fuck, and they brought in the Photon guy. Like, I don't, like, the problem with that one is I can't know. I have no basis to know how good this guy will be. So that's a complete black box to me. So whenever that happens, I just assume they'll be whatever league average is. Go on.
I have heard from people who watched a lot of Korean Challenger that they think that Photon wasn't even the best top laner within Korean Challengers, but he was probably like 2nd or 3rd.
Okay.
But the thing is, he doesn't really have to be super good. That's the thing. He can be a super low resource, weak side player on this roster, and I don't think it matters very much.
The problem is this, Monte, and this is where I'll transition. It's with the jungler, because here's the issue. Everyone else has taken this as like, right, the joke is, Bo doesn't even actually have to play League of Legends. He may as well just retire now because he had, yes, an incredible, phenomenal start to his LPL career that looked like, whoa, this might be a really crazy player. Combined with, when he came over to Vitality last year and couldn't play, he was doing all the streaming, and in solo queue, he's playing like what the joke would be if you wanted to show off mechanical jungle skills. This is like the way you should play to get a fucking name for yourself, because he looked like a psychopath, but in a good way in solo queue. Right, those 2 factors combined, the joke is he doesn't even need to play, mate. He's already Dandy 2.0 at the end of season 4. He's already score after all those years in KT. He's Carcer when he was in Royal, never give up. Like, he's everyone. He's the greatest jungler ever. Because the problem with this is this, guys, he hasn't played 1 game of LEC yet. That was the LPL he played in. He is Chinese. He has never played in LEC, a European league where he's going to have to speak English, and he is playing with players that, like, look, I imagine someone like Perks might fuck with his style, but no one knows how that actually manifest in the game. So even though, like the rest of you, I'm in for the experiment, I'll have one ticket, please. Thank you. I will keep my arms inside the car. Yes, I understand that. I'm in for the experiment, but no one knows how it's going to go. Like, it could be mega rough. Like, that style, by the way, that everyone's wanting. Like, I hope he plays like a psychopath in LEC. Yeah, you won't if it goes really badly. Like, what if that just doesn't connect whatsoever? So I will say, I'm going to give, like, as a rookie, yeah, obviously it's one year gamble on, like I say. I think this is a good gamble. The other three players I do think are money. Like, keeping Perks, he's like the sleeper fucking other best mid laner. If you look how he played last year, looks mega.
Free
Neon,
from.
I think it's mental, the fact that he was even available. Like I said, we had this discussion before. Vitality was the only top team, sadly, that was probably going to sign him because no one thought that Fnatic would be available. His problem was just that the other top teams are in love with Hans Sama or what Reckless or whatever. Like, I think this guy, from how he played last year, should have been guaranteed a top 3
He's
team.
criminally underrated.
Yeah, I'm glad he ended up on this team. And quite frankly, when you look at the team they have now, like, and obviously as what was it? What was I thinking about? Oh, and the support they got Kaiser from Mad Lions. I've always thought Mad Lions, Kaiser's a pretty legit player. Also, good roaming player. Can't wait to see him work with Perks. And then last thing I'll say is this. If you look at this team, because the other detail people forget is that Neon got his coach from Misfits to come. Remember how they played in Misfits?
That's gonna be one of my points.
Guys, they have a fucking mid laner in ADC. They can just do the same shit. They can just play fucking team fights. Like, this team could be baller.
Low key, there are actually a fucking ton of really good coaches in LEC right now. If you look at them, Mac, Peter Dunn, Carter, Freddie, Dylan Falco, Young Buck, like they have a really good like wealth of head coaches within this league right now that have developed. And I totally agree with you. Carter comes over with Neon, a lot of experience with this guy from Misfits. Now let's think about this.
Though, here's the key thing that makes me think he'll actually use Neon correctly. We're going to get proper fucking team fighting. Like, it's Perks and Neon could be a banger, just like Vethio and Neon were. That could be a banger duo.
Not only that, people aren't thinking about this angle too. Kaiser is super good. Kaiser is also one of the most versatile and creative support players. Remember when Mad Lions was doing all that kind of like crazy Wukong support stuff, like funneling all those resources into Kaiser? He's real good.
I think he was one of the guys who played the Pantheon or some mad shit like that. Was he one of those ones who had like a bunch of weird?
Yeah, I mean, he played a bunch of unconventional supports, and they invented strategies that then went kind of worldwide and started appearing in other leagues. This guy's, I think Mad Lions was kind of underwhelming last year, but I don't think Kaiser was the main part of that. But when you think about Perks' career, Perks has consistently been one of the most creative players in League of Legends. And having a tool like Kaiser alongside Perks on this roster is really exciting from a like champ select and team composition angle. As you say, Neon was very good, is continuing with his current coach, who we also know is good given the results that Misfits had with their roster.
A bunch of rosters as well. Yeah, they had pieces
bunch of rosters, scouting. They're very good at defining a style for that team and playing around the strengths of their players. So I think that's all very promising for Vitality. I don't think Photon has to do a lot. Bo, my counter argument for Bo is that Vitality hasn't rushed him into the roster, even when they were doing badly. You know, towards the end, I mean, I suppose they did have a hot streak towards the end of summer, which is probably why they didn't put him in when he could have been ready. And then they kind of collapsed in the playoffs. So Vitality, well, before they got to the playoffs, like they lost all their matches in that last week in order to not make the playoffs. But it didn't appear that they were going to miss the playoffs at the end of summer coming into the last couple weeks of games. So they might have not subbed in Bo for that reason. However, Bo as a player has now been, in Europe for the last, 6-7 months. So he's had a chance to acclimate to this team. They clearly would have been teaching him English during this time period. And he's had the adjustment. He's probably going to know from solo queue, at least, a lot of the different player styles. He's probably been watching a lot of the VODs in LEC. He should have been integrated into this team. So it's not like he just, came off the plane and is jumping onto this roster. There will have been a long acclimatization.
Does anyone know how good his English is, though? That's always going to be the fucking money question right there. Come on.
I don't know.
Because here's the problem. I'll say this once and once for all, which is the reason that I hate people making excuses when players don't have good things. I don't know in the case of Bo. This is pure speculation. Is because here's the problem. There's a very different type of role you can have. Like, here's an example. If you told me, Monte, I've got a Korean AD carry, You know what? He doesn't need to know fucking anything. He only has to be able to very loosely communicate with the support and we'll make it work because he's an AD carry. The role's on rails. If you're the jungler, I think half these teams, Monty, for real, their problem is this. He can do a slight bit of communication with them, but what they don't know is this. When they're talking to that guy, especially if you're someone like jungler, he's not hearing 90% of what they're saying. He's just going... And then at the end, he goes like, yes, I go Lee Sin. And then they're like, yes, he's got it. And then they start the game. It's like, you don't know what that guy understood. Jungle is a role that can be super cerebral and about what you're doing. So like, I just think that's one of those ones where it might be tricky. I'm leaving like a 15% chance it can just go terribly, basically.
Look, this is admittedly a hot take for me to have them number one.
Having them number one's pretty spicy, I will say.
I wanted to do a hot take here. I think this team's going to be really good out of the gate. I think they have all the right pieces, the right coaches to do it. I think Bo's going to clap some cheeks in the LEC. And the question is whether Photon is going to be able to play weak side, especially probably without knowing much English, given that he literally is the guy fresh off the plane. But I think this roster was deliberately constructed, and I believe in Perks, Neon, and Kaiser to lead this team. There's some really
very interested when Alfari does come back, though. Because I actually do think, underratedly, the reason Alfari, if you wanted to make like some kind of a super team, would be good is he, in theory, can play weak side, but also just be the best at it, like in terms of win lane, can't he? So, like, I think that I'm interested in the future of this team for sure. Right? Okay, that means their logic. You had XL as your number 3.
I had XL as Koi is number 3, XL is number 2.
Oh, you said Koi. Sorry, like, why did you have Koi number 3 then?
Well, they're keeping a lot of the players that made them very strong. But the thing is that I think they had a really good identity with Odo Omne in the top lane. Koi is difficult because there's 2 ways Koi can go. We've seen Shigenda in LEC before. Clearly what Koi is doing is that they want they want more options in terms of carry top laners. Because even when Odo Omne was playing carry tops last year on Rogue, he wasn't great. And so Shigenda, I would say they must believe that he has a higher ceiling to play carry top laners, which means that they will have more strategic options than they did with Odo Omne. Now, the question becomes, did they need more strategic options when you have Larson and Comp both playing very well and 2 very strong carry positions out of that lane and kind of a style of playing that all your players know and are on board with? I'm not sure. I think Koi, this is going to be a really good test of their GMing and their coaching to get Shigenda to a level that justifies losing Odo Omne. And for me, that put them a little lower because there's a high ceiling, but there's also a lower floor.
What sucks about this for me is if they didn't change out Odo Omne, I would have just had Koi number 1. Because I actually did think that lineup they had that won the last split was a really good set of players. I thought it looked like it had mega legs, by the way. It looked like it could run for a year or 2 more. Like the pieces, you had like the perfect mix of like young pieces. Odo Omne was the only veteran realistically. Then the rest of all the pieces were getting better and better. They all were together. They finally had overcome all sorts of group like character fucking test moments of choking and overcoming it. Also, like everything looked awesome. I cannot believe they didn't run that roster back. That to me, that might end up as one of the great what ifs in history, because I've also heard this, like I've always said on a past episode, I've heard that like the fucking GM guy was on some ego trip of wanting to like, I brought in Shigenda, this was me who did this, like that sort of fucking jazz. But I'll also say this, I've also heard in that team, they ascribe to the logic that I've heard famously comes apparently from G2, which is they think that you can't ever just keep the same 5 players. You have to like spice it up by at least replacing 1 player. The idea is if you keep the same 5, you'll stagnate and you won't like find new solutions or something. I don't buy that. I think that, look, even if as a trend it worked generally, I would always say this, like, yeah, but my team's exceptional, so we're going to be the exception. Like, I can't believe you don't give that at least 1 more split. So if they'd have had Odo Omne, I think it would have been awesome. Not least because one thing I loved about Odo Omne was it just streamlines the team. What I loved about Rogue was they were a team that just looked like the prototypical European League of Legends team, like good weak side experienced top laner, jungler who knows when to gank, mid laner can play all the mages and just consistently win in farm, ADC wins team fights if he gets there, and the support player does innovative picks and can fucking do a bit of shotgun. That's exactly like what you want to build. The joke is, if I'm asking, like, let's build a dream team tomorrow, we'd start with like a blueprint like that. Like Rogue had that, but they gave it up. So the Shigenda one's weird to me because, look, I understand why he came into LEC all those years ago. He was a good player in the RLs. It didn't really work out that well. I'm not even against him as a player. It's just, as you say, traditionally, you'd think he should be coming onto the team to be a star. To me, I don't really see them as a team that would play through top. That feels a bit weird to me. So I just don't know how they're going to make that work. And then I'll also throw this in there. The guy who was, as you said, Coach Seal, who was the assistant coach who came in. It was under his tenure when he came in that some of the other elements finally fell into place. They don't have him anymore. So I'm also interested to see how will that work out with the coaching staff. I've given the coaching staff a lot of props. They've had an amazing run of these last splits. Like the amount of games they've won is unbelievable. It's like insane how many they've won. Like you have to give them props in that regard, no matter whether they got the titles or not. But I just find it underwhelming in that sense. Like I would love this team to be my number one team. There's so many good players still. But the other thing is, I did think about that team when they came together. I thought some of it was actually the chemistry looked really good in those first week of Worlds, in the run in the playoffs. When you change even one player, chemistry can go out the window. You never know.
Well, it's also that yes, I do agree with the premise that they could have a higher ceiling with Shigenda if they had more carry potential in the top side. But the problem with that is that the rest of your players also, it increases the variance because now those players are going to have to play in a different role than they had to in the past in certain games. And it's just harder to do that when you don't know necessarily who's going to be getting the resources. The more variables you add, the higher potential for greater success, but also the higher potential for greater failure as those players adjust to playing that style. I think it's hard. This will be a good team. This will be a good team. They have a very solid core, and obviously, like, Trimby's really fucking good. Like, Malrung is very unpredictable and selfless. Larson and Comp are also very good. So this team definitely has a very high floor, but it's very clear that what they're trying to do is hit another gear, but they're taking a risk to do that.
I do think, though, hence why I have the number 2 on my list. Like, I do still think, like, as you said, the floor is really, really good. Like, just Larson, Combi, and Trimp is already a banger setup of people's. If Malrang works at all still, they'll be a contender. They just should be. I also think, look, here's the other thing to say. Even though I might be bummed out, I think people like Larson Trimby, look, they might like Otto Amn as a person. They don't agree with what I'm saying. They probably think they're going to win the bloody league again. And like, now's their time. They've got over the fucking hump, got the monkey off their back, all the fucking narrative. So I will say, hopefully the players themselves come out fucking inspired to win again.
Yeah.
Okay, I had as my number 1 XL. So where did you have them? You had them number 2?
2. Yeah, I think all the top 3 are pretty interchangeable, though. I did put Vitality up there just for the memes later on if I end up being right as my hot take. But for me,
here's what I think's insane about this XL one. The insane thing about the XL one is I do have them as my number 1 roster and team, as in they will win the split. Even though I actually don't think this team had close to the most money, the best like position in the offseason. And this is actually, in my example, an example of really good GMing, in my opinion. Really good GMing. Because if you look at what they've got in this team, they've obviously only kept 1 player from the last XL roster. Now, the reason that's significant is the last XL roster was like an NFL fucking built teammate where they took like 3 years to piece by piece, get from this to this to this, and do gradual upgrades of this piece to this piece. And you were only at the end gradually, like finally we're a playoff team. But what was shrewd was, because in this offseason, there was a whole bunch of angles that we're going to get into now where you could do upgrades, but collectively you could upgrade almost the whole team. That was the right move. I know it doesn't seem like it, because remember, your ego, if you were to do like past GMs I'm talking about, should be, I don't want to change them all because I built this team piece by piece. And if I just keep changing one piece, Monty, then I get all the credit if we like come like win the summer split. No, the better job is just get the best players now. And that's what they've done as far as I can tell. Because if you look at it, Odo Amner was available because of the weird Koi move, right? Again, to me, the idea people like Jankos and Odo Amner were available and almost everyone in the league didn't go like, can I have a call with you? Like, I can't believe that. So to me, that's a banger signing right there. Again, if you're in Europe, spoiler, everyone could. The joke is, Odo Amner is one of the only players I would put in like every team. He's the Impact of Europe, basically. That's my analogy. Like, if you want to build a championship team and you have Impact or Odo Amner and you're in your respective region, you've got the first piece already. You got that nailed. So Odo Amner is a great signing. Then they've done the upgrade from Marcoon to Marcoon, rather. to Cersei, I think Cersei actually is a mega steal. Look what that guy just did in Astralis. Like, that's a fucking buy low scenario. Like, this guy came back, no one believed in him. He looked mega. Like, I saw some people, by the way, even give this guy like MVP votes. I saw get it. If you look how many fucking games Astralis won, like, they had no. If you look at their laners, they had no business winning any games. Like, that was mega. So I think that's a great sign in there. True, everyone knows he's an idiosyncratic jungler, but mate, he somehow makes it work every time. If you notice that with all these different mid laners, he gets it working. Vethio, people will know I'm a mad Vethio stan. I think the last 3 seasons he's been fucking unbelievable. Like, this is a player where, like, my analogy would be, this is like the Patrick Mahomes of the fucking LEC guys. It's a slam dunk, obvious eye test. Like, 10 out of 10. If they're not the best player now, the question is, when are they going to be? Like, is it going to be next year? Is it going to be next split? Like, if it wasn't for the fact that Vethio was on those teams that weren't ever going to do the playoffs, maybe we already would consider him a contender to caps for like best player or whatever. It's just that the teams were always whacking playoffs. Then you look the bot lane, they kept Patrick the obvious best player anyway. And as you said from the G2 one, how they've stumbled into Targamas is beyond belief for me. Because here, I'll give you the analogy, guys. Think about this. Last year, everyone knows at the end of the year, Trimby was the shit, right? That was his second year. Now XL gets to have Targamas' second year. Your mind, like, what I don't get about this is for players like jungle and support, you don't blossom instantly. Like, it takes a little while to like fully unfold. To me, I think this could end up going down as one of the big misses for G2 in history, mate. Is bring Mickey X back, who's very good, but if you blow, like, I think Targamas for real could end up being one of the all-time great supports. He looked fucking mega to me, mate.
I mean, the funniest thing to go back to your point about jamming XL is that a lot of the problems that newer teams have is they don't have the prestige of the older brands. Like, players don't necessarily want to join them. But the thing about XL is that by slowly building up their roster and like increasing up and up in terms of the ranking, they made themselves over time a much more attractive destination, which then allowed them to pull off this coup of replacing 4 out of 5 of their players and it being an attractive destination for them. Now, they did spend money, but I think it's hilarious that G2 dropped Mickey X, and then XL just snapped him up, realizing that they were going to get good value out of this player who is now a free agent. And then they traded Mickey X back to G2 in return for Targamas, who I agree, I think is a better player right now. That's some really good GMing. And yes, Targamas was expensive in terms of the buyout. Now, VTO obviously is a player that they were able to grab at the dissolution of Misfits, but it's because they made themselves an attractive destination. You know, they kind of picked up a lot of the players that were either free or that other teams didn't want for various reasons, like Ottawamne, like Targamas. I think Xerxes, probably Astralis couldn't afford to keep Xerxes. And Xerxes is underrated because he's been on bad teams, but he has consistently been the best player on bad teams. And I don't think he's fundamentally a bad player. And I think people are going to find that out once you see this roster in action. My concern about Excel is really that Patrick has to shine now. Like,
there's no excuses now, yes. And all those people who've been telling us for years he could be, or he's a contender for best ADC. Well, we're going to find out now, aren't we? Because he's got all the pieces to win. Like, he should just win the whole league now, shouldn't he, logically?
And there are questions about VTO. Like, I think that on specific champions, VTO is extremely good. I think he's okay on certain other champions, but I don't think he has the biggest champion pool of all time. I also think he was an extremely resource-intensive player, and just looking at this roster with players, you know, he's just not going to get the same amount of resources that he had on Misfits. That's just straight up true. And the question will be with VTO, was he getting all of those resources because he was the only win condition on Misfits and he was stepping up? Or was he getting all those resources because he needs all of those resources to function, which could make this team as a whole dysfunctional, if that makes sense? Now, it's true that they have a weak side top lane, so he's still going to get a lot of those resources, but they're going to play differently. And Xerxes in particular does tend to favor a more farming, resource heavy, intensive style of jungling. Like, if you look at Xerxes' most famous games, like Karthus shit, you know? So I do think that there's going to be a question of how do you allocate resources on this roster, but I think Young Buck and Nelson are very aware of what they're getting into with these players, and hopefully VTO, as you say, will take the next step and develop as a player, because he shouldn't be the sole carry on this team like he was on Misfits.
This is actually why, by the way, guys, I actually think each off-season is going to be very interesting for the next couple of years. Because one thing I've noticed in LEC in particular is there are literally moves that are being blocked purely by the status of how big people's names are. So the two roles that are a nightmare right now, if you're in the LEC, is mid lane and ADC. Because think about how well Vethio and Neon played last year. Dude, they didn't even have options for most of the top teams. Because the problem is the top teams are like, sorry, I have caps, well, I have perks, well, I have fucking reckless, well, I have this. It's like, well, at the end of the day, these guys some of these players can't all be better than Vethio and Neon guys. And the Vethio one, to me, is crazy. Because I think there's another potential
He's already
miss.
an MVP player.
Oh, it's crazy. Dude, the idea that you come in and play like 3 splits back to back to back, like he just did, and then none of the top teams want you. What? Dude, that might look really bad in like 2 years from now. Like if this guy's the next Caps, that's going to age so poorly in 2 years from now, guys.
I mean, I don't know though, because here's the thing. The other top teams have, Humanoid, Caps, and Larson. Do you really replace any of those guys with VTO?
I thought Humanoid was mad questionable last year.
I mean, he was, except he was super good at Worlds. So, I agree he was mad questionable, but I still think you keep him instead of Razork, right? And you hope that maybe they can turn it around. It's just, I don't think any of those top 3 teams, it's a slam dunk. And XL does have money. I imagine that XL can probably pay VTO more money than Fnatic can pay him, for example.
Maybe in the case of Fnatic, because obviously Fnatic don't have all the same money. I will say as well, just like with Patrick, I'll be fair. I've hyped Youngbuck for all these years. You have to do it now, mate. You've just got the players now, because I've always said as well, I actually do think as well, historically, if you look, the reason he won the championships with all those big players, I think he's actually really good at management of big name players. So he's got the roster now. You've got some fucking big egos, some up and coming players, some veterans. I think this is the roster where he gets it done. So we'll see. We'll see. I've got him number 1. I'm hyping the shit.
All right. I got Vitality number 1. So my top 3 are Vitality, XL, Koi, and yours are?
Opposite way around. I had XL, Koi, Vitality.
That's fine.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.